All passenger cars and trucks have some type of suspension system. These suspension systems improve passenger comfort by smoothing out the bumps in the road and provide improved handling when we make a simple turn or we're forced to make a sudden stop. Suspension components are designed to withstand the harsh demands of everyday driving. Most of us have hit a bump, curb, or pothole and found the suspension did not bend or break. But these obstacles, in addition to normal wear and tear, can cause the suspension to become misaligned. For these reasons, wheel alignments have become a normal part of vehicle maintenance. Although suspension components are durable, they can be damaged. Severe impacts, such as those in a collision, can damage suspension parts. When writing a repair estimate, it's not difficult to identify damaged suspension components. Visible bends, wrinkles, or cracked paint indicate which parts are damaged and need to be replaced. It's our policy not to replace suspension components unless there is evidence of damage. The difficulty arises when the body repairs are complete, but the wheels will not align. Most technicians and estimators have a difficult time identifying why the wheels will not align. This results in guessing. Many of you are familiar with multiple supplement requests for suspension parts, such as struts, knuckles, and control arms, until proper alignment is achieved. In this video, we're going to show you a few suspension quick checks that you can perform in about 10 minutes to help determine why the wheels will not align. These checks can determine if the problem is wheel alignment or suspension alignment. There are two other suspension angles we need to be familiar with: steering axis inclination and caster angle. These are suspension alignment angles. It's important to understand the difference between wheel alignment and suspension alignment. Most alignment technicians check wheel alignment but do not check suspension alignment. Suspension alignment deals with the position of the suspension pivot points. On vehicles with strut-type suspension, the pivot points are the top of the strut and the lower ball joint. Steering axis inclination, or SAI, is the measurement in degrees between true straight vertical and an imaginary line drawn through the suspension pivot points. To better illustrate SAI, let's look at this example. The Earth has a north and south pole. The Earth has an axis, or imaginary line, drawn between the North Pole and the South Pole on which the Earth rotates. Now, the Earth's axis is not straight up and down. It's tilted or inclined. The angle between true vertical and the Earth's axis is Earth axis inclination. Suspension also has a north and south pole. The North Pole is the top of the strut, and the South Pole is the lower ball joint. The angle between true vertical and the imaginary line drawn through the steering pivot points is steering axis inclination. On most vehicles with strut-type suspension, SAI should be equal from side to side. This means the strut towers are equal distance from center line, and lower ball joints are also equal distance from center line. Caster angle is similar to SAI. Caster angle deals with the same imaginary line drawn through the steering pivot points. On most vehicles with strut-type suspension, caster angle should be equal from side to side, meaning the strut towers and the lower ball joints on both sides are equal distance forward. If the top of the strut towers and lower ball joints are equal distance from center line, and the top of the strut towers and lower ball joints are equal distance forward, we have equal SAI and caster angle alignment. The components holding the suspension parts are in the correct location. It's important to understand wheel alignment angles are caster, camber, and toe. Suspension alignment angles are SAI and caster angle, which affect wheel alignment. A mistake generally made when diagnosing a wheel alignment problem is replacing the strut and knuckle without first checking for proper suspension alignment. If a strut tower or lower ball joint is in the wrong location, replacing a strut or knuckle would have no effect on the position of the wheel. For example, the left front wheel on this Cavalier is out of alignment. Replacing the strut and knuckle would have no effect on the alignment of the wheel until the strut tower and lower ball joint are returned to the correct location. Let's apply what we've learned so far. This car has an alignment problem. The body repairs are complete, but the left front wheel is not within alignment specifications. The repairer has requested a supplement for a new strut and knuckle. It will only take a few minutes to determine what is wrong with this car, but we need to ask the repairer a few questions. First, we need to ask what specification is off. In this example, caster is not within specification. Second, does the wheel have too much or not enough? This tells us which direction the tire is leaning and helps isolate the problem. This vehicle has 1/2 degree negative caster, but should have 1.2 degrees of positive caster. Third, is the other side okay? If the opposite wheel is within specification, we can use it as a basis for comparison measurements. The repairer says the right side is okay. You may find some repairers may not know the answers to these questions. Ask the repairer to contact the alignment shop to get the information you need. What does this condition look like? We don't have enough positive caster. Either the top of the strut tower is too far forward, the lower ball joint is too far back, or, if they're okay, it may be a bent strut or knuckle. We don't want to consider replacing the strut or knuckle until we're sure we have correct suspension alignment. Most of the measurements we're going to use are available in published unibody specification charts. Comparison measurements may also be used to determine suspension misalignment. Let's start at the top. It's unlikely the strut tower is too far forward, but by using the dimensions in a frame specification book or comparing the left side measurements with the right side, we can determine if the top of the strut is in the correct location. We used a comparison measurement from a strut tower bolt to the rear fender bolt on both sides. As we suspected, the top of the strut tower is the same distance forward as the right side. Now, we need to know if the ball joint is in the correct location. We suspect that the ball joint is too far back. We elected to make another comparison measurement from the lower ball joint to the front of the rocker panel. Remember, when using comparison measurements, you can use any point or location hole as long as it is consistent from side to side. Our comparison measurements indicate the left ball joint is indeed too far back compared to the right side. Something is holding the ball joint in the wrong place. The component holding the ball joint is the lower control arm. We noticed what appears to be minor damage to the lower control arm, which was overlooked on the original inspection. Before we replace the lower control arm, we're going to check the suspension cradle. The cradle could be holding the lower control arm in the wrong place, which in turn would hold the ball joint in the wrong location. To determine if the cradle is in the proper location, we have hung 2 additional gauges on the cradle and compared them to the vehicle center line. The gauges indicate that the cradle is in the correct location. We know the cradle is in the correct location and the ball joint is too far back, which confirms the lower control arm is damaged and must be replaced. Note, we did not check for strut or knuckle damage because neither the strut or knuckle has any effect on the location of the ball joint. Replacing the lower control arm corrected the suspension alignment problem and allowed the technician to properly align the wheels. The car is now ready for delivery. Let's try another. We have been told that this car will not align on the right side. Our first question, what specification is off? Camber. Second question, too much or not enough? The right wheel specifications call for 0 camber, but the wheel is 1.5 degrees negative camber. Third question, is the other side okay? We have been told the right wheel is out of alignment, but the left side is okay. What does this condition look like? The tire is tilted in at the top. Either the strut tower is too far in towards center line, the ball joint is too far out from center line, or if they're okay, it may be a bent strut or knuckle. Remember, there is no reason to consider replacing the strut and knuckle. We have not verified the components holding the suspension are in the correct location. Let's first determine if the strut tower is in the correct location. We suspect this strut tower is tilted too far inward towards center line. By using the unibody specification charts or comparison measurements, we can determine if the strut tower is misaligned. The chart shows the cross measurement from a bolt on top of the strut tower to the rear bolt on the opposite fender to be 47 5/16 inches. By performing these simple cross measurements, we determine the strut tower is in the correct location. Next, let's look at the lower ball joints. To check the location of the lower ball joint, we elected to use a comparison measurement from center line. We have located the center of the car by hanging 2 self-centering gauges in the center section. We need a center line point between the lower ball joints from which we can make our comparison measurements. To do this, we are using a block of wood and a common sheet metal screw. We simply align the vertical screw with the 2 center line pins. The screw represents center line, from which we can make our comparison measurements. We have measured from center line to each ball joint and found they are equal distance. Measurements verify the components holding the suspension are in the correct location. These quick measurements have ruled out strut tower misalignment, lower control arm damage, cradle and unibody misalignment, but we still have a wheel that has negative camber or is tilted in at the top. Since the components holding the suspension are in the right location, we now know the problem must be between the top of the strut and the lower ball joint. On this vehicle, the 2 components are the strut and knuckle, but before we check these parts for damage, let's discuss what we're looking for. When a tube bends, one side stretches and the other side compresses or wrinkles. A strut tube reacts in much the same way. Generally, damage will be visible at the point the strut tube enters the collar, just above the knuckle. Minor damage to a strut can be difficult to find. However, knowing what alignment specification is off can direct you to the damaged side of the strut. This illustration demonstrates how knowing which specification is off can help locate strut damage. Positive camber. Look for wrinkles or damage on the inside. Negative camber. Look for wrinkles or damage on the outside. Positive caster. Look for wrinkles or damage on the front. Negative caster. Look for wrinkles or damage on the back. Back to our negative camber problem. The top of the strut and lower ball joint are in the correct location, but the top of the wheel is tilted in. We looked on the outside of the strut and found some minor cracked paint. The strut will be replaced since the damage relates to our negative camber problem. We're also going to check for knuckle damage by holding a straight edge or carpenter square against the disc rotor or hub. Measuring from the straight edge to a fixed point on the knuckle and comparing the measurement to the knuckle on the undamaged side can help determine if the knuckle is damaged. This is also a quick way to check steering arms. Take the same measurement from the straight edge to the steering arm and compare that measurement to the opposite side. The damaged strut was replaced, and the wheel is now within specifications. Just a word of caution on the practice of bending struts to achieve proper alignment. We do not support this type of quick fix. Bending a strut to achieve proper wheel alignment does not make much sense and is probably compensating for a suspension alignment problem. Never bend a strut. If it's damaged, replace it. Occasionally, you may find both wheels will not align. One wheel has too much camber, and the other has too little camber. First, verify the top of the struts are in the correct location. Next, check the location of the ball joints. After locating center line, make some comparison measurements to the control arm mounts and cradle. It may be the cradle has shifted. Notice how moving the cradle affects both suspension angles. 2 additional frame gauges on the cradle can verify the misalignment. In most cases, after realigning the cradle, the lower ball joints are in the correct location.